Are you letting the fear of failure keep you from chasing your dreams? Many of us are so afraid of failing at something that we're afraid even to try. The problem with that is anything worth doing comes with the risk of failure. And if you're afraid to take that risk, that means you'll never achieve anything. The only way to guarantee that you'll never ever fail is to never try to do anything. But if you end up doing that, you're going to end up failing at life. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is to become comfortable with that discomfort that comes from the fear of failure. And that's what I'm going to talk about in this video. So if you've had something that you want to do, that you know you should do, something that you need to achieve to fulfill your life's dream, but you've been held back because you're a fear of failing, because if you fail, what's to be afraid of? Well, people are afraid of being judged by others. They're afraid of being rejected. They're afraid of disappointing their family and friends and their loved ones. And they're just afraid of losing control. But you can become comfortable with that fear. And that's what's going to allow you to actually chase your dreams and hopefully catch your dreams. Hi, I'm Tim Packer. If you don't know me, I'm a very successful artist. I made the decision about a year ago to make a switch from my main focus as painting to teaching and sharing everything I've learned about becoming a successful artist. Now, this channel is mainly dedicated to those who want to become successful artists and make a full-time career out of their art. But this video is for anybody who has a dream of something they want to achieve and so far has been afraid to take that step to make it come true. Now, last year when I made the decision to start teaching, I actually created my own online art academy, the Tim Packer Art Academy. This video that's coming up is from a module in my course, Becoming a Successful Artist. This is a long, in-depth course, a sort of mastermind for those who are dead serious about becoming successful professional artists. But as I said earlier, this video applies to everybody who has a dream where fear has been keeping you from taking that next step. In this module, I'm going to talk about courage and fear. Now, you might think this is a pretty strange thing to be focusing on if we're talking about the business of being an artist and earning a successful living. But I think this is actually one of the keys to being able to succeed, not only as an artist, but in life in general. Now, when we talk about fear, I mean, there's two different types of fear. There's fear of physical danger. That's obviously with the firefighters, or I spent 18 years in the police force and was in a lot of different hairy situations. And then there's also emotional fear, right? That's that's things like nervousness and anxiety, where there's no real physical jeopardy, but we're afraid of failing, or we're afraid of being rejected or whatever. If you decide to pursue a career as an artist, you are definitely going to have to deal with this fear. And that's what this module is about. So let's talk about me. What's the scariest thing I've ever done in my life? I mean, I've been involved in a lot of really hairy situations on the police force, and I've been injured. I was in a really bad car accident. I've faced bad guys with guns. I've faced bad guys with knives. I've arrested people at a murder scene where they're holding a knife in their hand that's actually dripping with the blood of the victim. None of that stuff comes close to the scariest thing I've ever done in my life. And that was to quit my job as a police officer, cash in my pension, and try to make a living as an artist. And that may sound crazy, but it's not even close. So the question is, like, why was I so afraid? Especially when you look at our circumstances. I mean, Diane had a very good job, my wife. She actually made enough money that, even if I was a complete failure, it's not like we were going to lose our house or not be able to pay our bills. She made enough money to actually, for us to live a modest life with the house that we were in. I also had an incredible skill set from my time as a detective in the commercial crime unit. I could easily go into the private sector and get a job in corporate security making $100,000 a year. So there was no real jeopardy. But why did it feel so scary? And it was terrifying. We thought about this from, I guess it was around September of 1999. I didn't tell my boss until the middle of October. And then I actually left at the very end of 1999. When I went home on Christmas vacation, that was it. I was done. I think my actual retirement day was January 4th. But almost on a nightly basis, I would wake up in a cold sweat and just think, oh my God, what am I doing? Is this crazy? Maybe I'm making the biggest mistake of my life. And it was very, very scary. As I said, more scary than anything I've ever done in my life, actually, before and since. Well, here's why it was so scary, and it has to do with evolution. So, when we evolved, when we were out on the savannah as hunter gatherers, our primitive brains were developed to sense anything that made us feel uncomfortable. And that's kind of like that sixth sense that just something's not right. But even on a more basic level, if you were out on the grassland and you heard a lion roar, you felt uncomfortable right away before you even processed it. And you would start trying to get out of that uncomfortable place and get to safety because you realize, okay, there's lions out here. I don't have any cover or concealment or no place to get away. So you would run back into the jungle. And what ended up happening is our brains were evolved to equate being uncomfortable to the sense of something being dangerous. And then we're hyper evolved to remove us from whatever the danger is. And that was very important to us as a species for survival. But what's the problem with that? Well, we're not out on the savannah anymore. We don't have lions walking down the street. There are all kinds of things that make us uncomfortable, but it doesn't mean they're dangerous and it doesn't mean we should run away from them. And here's the part of the brain that's responsible for that. It's actually called the amygdala. It's also referred to as the lizard brain because that's the most primitive part of our brain. But as I said, it just deals with emotions and feelings, and it equates being uncomfortable with being in danger. Now, that danger again leads to fear, which then leads us to the fight or flight response. So if you perceive doing something that's going to make you uncomfortable, or if you're actually doing the thing that's uncomfortable, that lizard brain rears up and says, get out of here, get out of here. This is dangerous. And the more that you don't listen to it initially, the louder and louder it shouts, danger, danger, danger. And that's what was happening with me with leaving the police force. I was very uncomfortable with the thought of quitting my job and cashing in my pension and trying to make it as an artist. And that led to the amygdala sensing that discomfort, which then caused fear. And with the fact that I was still in that situation, not running away from it, the running away from it would have been to decide, no, I'm just going to stay on the police force because that makes me feel comfortable. Because I refused to do that, that fear just got worse and worse and worse. Now, look at what are the things that make us feel the most uncomfortable in today's world, and what are the things that we're most afraid of? Well, one of them is being judged and then being rejected. And that is totally what it means to be an artist. Every time you go to a festival, for example, every single person that walks by your booth has the ability to judge you and reject you. And the fact of the matter is, most of them are going to reject you even if you have a very successful show. I mean, this is what always kind of blew my mind when I was doing the shows and even when I was having amazing success. Say I did a festival and I sold 15 paintings to 12 different clients. Well, that would be a really good show. But when you do the numbers, if 15,000 people came to that festival, that means 14,498 of them looked at my work and rejected it. So we are going to experience a lot more rejection in our careers than we are acceptance, or never mind people actually loving our work, getting out their wallets and paying us for it. So that fear of rejection makes us feel very, very uncomfortable. And there's actually really good evolutionary reasons for that. Because in the past, if you were rejected, that could cost you your life. If you were rejected by your mother, you're going to die, right? As a baby, that's one of the most important things. We're just that instinctive. We want to bond with our mother because evolution has taught us that if you don't bond with your mother, you're not very likely to survive. And then even when we lived in tribal groups or even in small cities, being rejected by the tribe or being banished, that often was a death sentence because it was impossible to survive on our own. So that feeling of wanting to be accepted by people is really, really huge. But in today's day and age, it's not life or death. And in fact, we probably face rejection, just like in that art festival scenario, in our normal lives, way, way more than we experience acceptance. And for the most part, there's actually zero consequence to our life for it. Now, another thing that makes us very uncomfortable is contemplating failure, that fear of failure. Nobody wants to fail in front of people. It makes us feel very, very uncomfortable. And that raises up the lizard brain, which again starts to take over. Another thing that we don't like is we don't like to lose control, right? We like to be in control of our environment, even if our environment isn't the greatest or our life isn't the greatest. At least if it's predictable and we're in control, will we feel better? And then finally, the fear of disappointing others. That's a big thing. And that goes into that whole rejection thing too, right? We don't want to disappoint our parents, our spouses, our kids, our friends. So there's all of these things in our lives now that make us feel uncomfortable and that we actually fear that really don't have huge consequences. And the problem with that lizard brain is that there's analogies that refer to it as it's like an elephant. It's like if you're riding an elephant, you can guide the elephant kind of in the direction that you want it to go. But if the elephant decides it wants to go this way, there's nothing you can do to stop it. And often that's what happens with our amygdala. It just fixates on the idea that something's making us feel uncomfortable. That generates fear. And then our whole being just becomes consumed with get me out of this situation that is making me feel fear. But the problem nowadays is this happens, as I said, often where there's no real jeopardy. The worst thing that's going to happen really isn't that bad. So no wonder I woke up in a cold sweat many nights, right? I was afraid of failing. I was afraid of being judged. I was afraid of losing control. I was afraid of disappointing others. And I experienced these feelings throughout the day on a daily basis. Because here's the worst part about this kind of stuff is not only do we feel it while we're actually in the situation, we feel it when we're just contemplating it in the future. So for that entire period leading up to it, before I left the police force, even before I told my boss, I would sit there and think about it. And that fear is just as real when you're thinking about it as it is when you're actually doing the thing. So you experience it vicariously, even though the thing hasn't even happened yet. So evolution has actually programmed us with that amygdala, with the idea that discomfort translates to fear, and then an overwhelming desire to get out of that situation that is making us feel that. And that was actually very well suited to when we were primitive hominids, but it's not well suited to 2021. Now we feel uncomfortable in many situations where there's no danger, but we still feel that overwhelming fear. The most common thing that people say is their biggest fear is public speaking. And if you think about it, it's crazy. I mean, it's not shark attack. It's not being in a fatal accident. It's not getting cancer. It's not one of millions of things that actually are terrifying. It's the thought of standing up in front of a room full of people and having to speak. What's the worst thing that can happen? You can go up there and absolutely bomb. Say it's at a wedding, or even say it's at a speech you're giving that you're getting paid for. You can absolutely bomb, and there's really little impact on your life. But because it's very uncomfortable, because to go back to this one here, you're afraid of failing, you're afraid of judgment, you're afraid of losing control, of kind of freezing up on stage, you're afraid of disappointing other people. These are all huge fears, and chances are you've probably experienced them vicariously leading up to it, so that the moment you get on stage, you probably are in jeopardy of having a panic attack. But the problem with this is often that thing that is making us feel uncomfortable is exactly the thing that we should be doing. Now, I mentioned in an earlier module that experience I had when I was at the Zoltan Szabo workshop, and I sat there for 15 minutes arguing with myself about whether I should get out my pencil, do a detailed drawing, and work from there, or whether I should just throw caution to the wind, wet the page, start with big wet washes, knowing full well that there was a very good chance that I was going to fail. And it was very, very uncomfortable. Now, luckily, I ended up making the decision, realizing that trying and failing was more important than doing the safe thing and having a moderate success, because that's the one thing. Often the thing making us uncomfortable is exactly the thing we should be doing. Whereas doing the thing that I did, quitting my job, cashing in my pension to pursue a career where the stereotype is of someone starving in a garret, that makes absolutely no sense. And it should make me uncomfortable, which it did, but it was exactly the right thing. Now, while fear can actually be a huge impediment to us doing things, fear can also be used as a motivator. If you look at, once you've made the decision to do something, then that fear of failure can be a huge motivator to make you actually do the things you need to do to succeed. Same with that fear of being judged, right? It's like when I left the police force, it's like the thing that motivated me more than anything else to do the work was I was afraid of failing. I was afraid of being judged and not being up to snuff. I was afraid of disappointing my wife. I was afraid of disappointing my kids, and I was afraid of losing control. But I use these fears as motivation to do the work to continually improve until I eventually found success. Now, one thing that I've recently discovered, and one of the things that I've really enjoyed about teaching this course, is there's a number of things that I believe that have been fundamental to my success, but I'm not necessarily the best person in terms of putting them into words or understanding why they work. So over the course of the past year, I've probably watched 300-400 hours of YouTube videos by psychologists, psychiatrists, brain scientists, people who are motivational speakers, people that are business speakers, so that I can actually learn kind of why this stuff works and if the things that I believe are actually true. And here's one thing that really, really is important, is that we're much more likely to do the work and accept the risk if it's in the service of our core values. And so it's really, really important to understand what your core values are and try and align your goals and your plans with those core values. Now, this is something that I've only recently realized for me in terms of like, what should you fear most? I realized for me, the thing that I fear most is the thought of contemplating my imminent death and realizing that I didn't live the life I was meant to live. Not only didn't live the life I was meant to live, I didn't even try to live the life that I was meant to live. Now, that first came to me back in 1996 when my friend Billy Hancock, young police officer, was murdered. And that's actually a thing called mortality motivation. But when he was killed at work, I realized, I knew that there was always a chance that could happen. Anybody could get hit by a truck tomorrow. You could fall down the stairs. I certainly attended many, many calls on the police force with some of the most ridiculous accidents that actually ended up in fatalities that you would never even imagine that there was any sort of risk. So I knew kind of at an intellectual level that there's no guarantee of tomorrow or next year, 10 years or 20 years. But it wasn't until a friend of mine, the same age as me, that passed away, that was killed, that really, really came home to me. And I just realized that I knew I was an artist, And that if I didn't try to maximize my ability as an artist, at least to take it as far as I could, if I didn't even try, that would be a huge, huge failure for me in terms of how I went about living my life. And that would be the thing I would regret the most. Now, I'm very thankful that I made that decision 25 years ago, because as you know, I almost died twice in the period of 2019 into 2020. So this is a picture of me right after my surgery where I almost bled out in my hospital bed after the surgery when an artery in my neck opened up. And the one thing I can tell you is we are all going to experience that moment, hopefully. Well, maybe not, depending on how you feel. If you die in your sleep, you won't. But I was very aware of the fact that for the second time in that 12-month period, there was a very good chance I was going to die in the next couple minutes. And the one thing I can tell you is there was an incredible feeling of peace that came over me because I realized I had lived the life I was meant to live. I had very, very few regrets, other than the fact, as I said before, I knew it was going to be hard on my wife, Diane, and on my boys. And there was still a lot of things I wanted to do. But I thought, if this is it, if this is my time, I've been granted a hell of a life. And I was just nothing more than thankful for the life that I'd been given. Now, the one regret that did pop up, and it was a minor one, was that I hadn't done as much as I could in terms of sharing the information that I'd learned about how to make a living as an artist. The fact that I actually knew what I was talking about because Brooke had had such great success following my advice. And so that's when I made the decision that if I got through this and got back healthy, that was going to be the switch and focus of my life. And that was scary. All of those other things that I felt when contemplating leaving the police force, they were all there again, except I wasn't afraid because I knew that if I was passionate about it, which I was, if I was willing to do the work, which I was, and if I had a willingness and ability to learn everything that I needed to learn to make that a success, then I knew it was just a matter of putting in the time, putting in the work, and success would come. Now, would it take a year? Would it take 2 years? Would it take 5 years? That I didn't know. But I also knew that, I'm going to contemplate that moment again of my imminent death one time down the road. What I couldn't contemplate is 10 years from now, if that happens, or 20 years from now, lying there and thinking, oh, I never really got around to doing the teaching. That's what I wanted to do. And so, again, what we need to do is experience the fear, but not let it control us. Understand why we're feeling that way, but then we have to deal with it. You cannot let the elephant run your life. Now, I recently watched a video by Susan David. Now, she's a PhD and a Harvard professor, and she's written a book on emotional agility. And this is one of the best quotes I've ever heard in my life. That is that discomfort is the price of a meaningful life. That if you are going to live a meaningful life, you are going to risk failure. You are going to risk being judged. You are going to risk disappointing others. You are going to risk losing control. And that is going to wake the lizard brain that's going to want to make you run from that. But you can't do it. A comfortable life is a life without meaning. And the other thing that she talks about is there are no good or bad emotions. They just are. So when I experienced all of those same emotions with the thought of quitting painting and teaching, I experienced them, but I didn't let them hijack my actions. I understand why I'm feeling them and gently accepted them. And this is something that I love when she talked about courage. A lot of people think that people who are courageous or brave aren't afraid. And that's actually not true. People who aren't afraid are pretty much not smart. Stupid people can do some really dangerous things because they don't have the ability to contemplate the negative outcomes. But that's not courage. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's in fact fear walking. It's recognizing the fear and actually taking it head on and doing the thing in spite of the fear. So how do we move forward in our life when we have this lizard brain that's driving the elephant that wants us to do all this stuff that's not necessarily in our best interest and often is totally against our best interests? Well, the first thing is to identify your core values. Remember, if what you're doing is in line with your core values, you're much more likely to be willing to risk failure, risk judgment, risk disappointing others, all of these other kind of emotional fears that we have. So when you start to experience discomfort, ask yourself, is this in line with my core values, and what's the jeopardy? So again, getting back to that Zoltan Szabo workshop, right? I experienced discomfort because I was feeling all of these fears. And it's like, well, but moving forward and just trying to paint on wet and jump into the process mode, is that in line with my core values? It's like, yes, it is, because that's why I was there. I was there at this workshop because I wanted to learn how to loosen up and how to go beyond painting just high realism. So it was definitely in line with my core values. And what's the jeopardy? It's like, well, if I fail, I guess some of these people will have a lesser opinion of me as an artist. I might be embarrassed because I thought it's going to reflect poorly on the Canadian Society of Painters and Watercolor, because people would say, wow, this guy just got elected. Marilyn's been bragging about me. And look at this dog's breakfast he just created. But at the end of the day, is that any real jeopardy to me? No. And so I was able to move forward and do it. Now, I didn't understand all this stuff during my career. A lot of the things that I'm going to be talking about and I have talked about during this course, these are things that I've only really learned as actual philosophical ideas or strategies to deal with the various ways we feel because of preparing for this. But that's actually what I did, right? I kind of just said, I'm not there for these people. I'm here for me. If I fall flat in my face, I feel confident I can pick myself up and move on. Here's another saying. It's about the space. And this is a really important space. And it's Viktor Frankl, who's an Austrian neurologist, psychologist, and Holocaust survivor. And he came up with this idea that between the stimulus and the response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and freedom. Now, the reason I have the dog there licking his chops, because we all know Pavlov's theory with the dogs, right? They condition them to, every time they hear a bell, they get fed. And then when they hear a bell, they drool, whether there's food there or not, because there's a stimulus and response. Now, our lizard brain wants us to respond immediately to the stimulus. But our higher brain, the frontal cortex, in that space between the stimulus and when we respond, we have the power to make a choice of how we are going to respond. And so, again, you can get in the habit of every time you think about doing something that you know you should do, and then you feel that discomfort, which turns to fear, so then you don't do it. You have the ability to choose to override that. Now, it's going to likely cause that lizard brain to get even more afraid. But over time, what happens is you actually start to get comfortable with the discomfort. And that's where courage comes in, right? So that's to act in accordance with your core values. And that's despite the possibility or even likelihood of failure, of judgment, of disappointing others, of loss of control, all of the things that I felt when I quit my job as a police officer to pursue my art career. And also all of the things that I felt when I contemplated quitting my art career to become a teacher. The difference is, by the time I did the second thing, I understand all of this stuff, and I didn't go through those nights of waking in a cold sweat. I don't wake up now worried, even though I'm still early on this journey. I just know that this is what I should be doing. It's in accordance with my core values, and that's what is important. I hope you found that video helpful. I've got some more free training for those of you who are aspiring artists. I feel very strongly that learning composition, the way in which we arrange the colors, shapes, values, edges, etc. on our canvas is one of the most important skills to learn as an artist. I often find it heartbreaking that artists make a few major decisions in the beginning of the painting process in terms of how they're going to divide their page or where they're placing elements that just dooms the painting to failure. And then no matter how much time they put into it, whether it's a day, a week, or 3 weeks, the painting is doomed to fail because of some very bad decisions they made early on in the process. So I've put together a list of what I consider the 10 most common compositional weaknesses that I see over and over again in paintings. So you can get that free PDF by going to the Tim Packer Art Academy. That's www.timpackerartacademy.com. And if you just scroll down on the main page and you sign up for my newsletter, you'll automatically get that PDF. Just by avoiding these common mistakes, I guarantee you're going to start to produce stronger paintings. Now you'll also get a newsletter every week when I publish a new video with a brief description about the video. And also you can unsubscribe at any time you want. Now for those of you who are really serious about becoming a successful artist and having a full-time career as an artist, I put together a free webinar called the 10 Keys to Selling Your Art. Now in this webinar, you'll get a bit of a history about how I went from a starving artist to a police officer to a starving artist again, and then to where I am now, where I earn over $200,000 a year and have for the last 10 years. You're also going to get a little bit of the story of the young artist that I mentored, Brooke Cormier. And this is just an amazing story. I mentored her for a couple years, and she's been able to accomplish in about 5 years what's taken me over 20 years. And then you're also going to get the 10 keys. So these are the things that I believe are very, very important if you want to be successful in selling your art. And you'll also get a bit of a description about my mastermind course, Becoming a Successful Artist. If that's something that interests you, there's kind of an in-depth explanation of the course, as well as the opportunity to get it at an amazing discount. Now, one of the things about this course is it also comes with a lifetime subscription to my Hungry Artist community. And that's a group of artists who have taken the course where about once a month we get together on Zoom calls and they ask me questions, I critique their work, I give them career advice. So if you want to have access to me, that's a great opportunity. Now that window of the free lifetime access is actually going to be coming to a close when we hit 100 members. And we're actually right now, I think, at about 85. So after that, it's actually going to become a paid subscription service. So if you take advantage of that right now, you're going to get the Hungry Artist community free for life, and that's regularly a $19 a month subscription fee. So I hope you found this video helpful. A couple things I want to leave you with is that the next 5, 10, 20 years are going to go by whether you take any action now or not. And I would really, really encourage you to think about what is it you want your life to look like and to start taking steps now to make that happen. And that's likely going to involve doing things that make you feel uncomfortable. But again, if you push through the discomfort, eventually you get comfortable with that feeling. And not only that, you're going to fail numerous times, but what you end up realizing is failing is not so bad. You pick yourself up and move on. You just don't want to fail at a point where it takes you out of the game. So obviously look at what's the jeopardy of if you fail at whatever it is you're doing. And I'm just going to end with a final quote of Michael Goggins, which is, "No breakthroughs ever happened in the comfort zone." So if you enjoyed this video and you'd like me to keep producing more content, there's a few things you can do for me. You can click on the like button, you can subscribe, and if you want to be notified every time I post a new video, you can click on the little bell.